The sun had just slipped beneath the rugged western ridges of Blackwood Forest, casting long shadows across the dense evergreens. The air, crisp and quiet, carried with it the hush that only 30 years of solitude could teach a man to love. It was in that sacred silence that Hank Williams, aged 68, sat on the porch of his hand-built cabin, sipping a cup of steaming herbal tea. His fingers, worn from decades of chopping wood and crafting tools, wrapped gently around the ceramic mug. Then it came, the low, mechanical growl of engines, a sound so out of place, so alien to this corner of the world, that it pierced through, the serenity, like a rifle crack. Hank didn't flinch. His ears, long attuned to the language of wind and bird call, recognized immediately what it was. Bulldozers, trucks, horizon timber. They had come early. Inside, on a worn wooden table, the eviction notice still lay untouched. A cold, formal letter with the county seal stamped in crimson. "Vacate by tomorrow," it read. But deadlines meant little to steel machines and corporate ambitions. Hank stood slowly, setting the tea aside. Though time had painted his hair, silver and etched lines across his face, there remained in him the silent dignity of a hunter, a man who once knew how to survive, how to wait, how to act when the moment called. His pack was ready. It had been for days. All he could carry of a lifetime now fit in a bag light enough for a frail back to bear. As he stepped back into the cabin one last time, his eyes wandered. The rifle on the wall, coated in dust. The old, pelts faded by sun and time. And the black and white photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes. Betty, his wife, taken from him 2 decades ago. This had been their dream once. A quiet life away from everything, from everyone. And now, even that was being taken. Then, Hank did something he hadn't done in weeks. He whistled. Not a tune, but a signal. Short, deliberate, sharp. Into the thickening dusk, into the shadows of the forest. And there, beneath an old pine, something stirred. 2 golden eyes emerged, glowing like embers. Rusty, the wildcat, stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Grey fur speckled with the faint ghosts of once vibrant yellow, a torn ear and a scar across the muzzle. He was older now, like Hank, slower, but still proud, still wild. Hank said nothing. He simply placed a small piece of jerky on the porch, like he always did. But this time, Rusty did not wait for Hank to retreat inside. This time, the wildcat came closer than ever before. And then, he turned, paused, looked back. A choice was being offered. The machines were coming. The past was crumbling. But something deeper than fear, deeper than instinct, was calling Hank into the woods, and he followed. They moved in silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but of unspoken understanding, of 2 aging beings who had shared a long and complicated history. Hank walked behind, his steps careful and deliberate, while ahead, Rusty padded softly through the underbrush, pausing every so often to check that his unlikely companion was still following. The forest embraced them like an old friend. Shafts of fading twilight filtered through the tall pines, and with every step, the sound of approaching engines grew more distant, replaced by the subtle symphony of nature. A breeze brushing through branches, a raven's distant call, the snap of a twig beneath Hank's boot. 3 years ago, none of this would have seemed possible. Back then, Rusty had been a ghost, an elusive shadow that haunted Hank's territory. The first time he saw the wildcat was during a snowy morning, its paw prints crisscrossing Hank's trapline. Hank had admired the creature's strength, its raw independence, but admiration didn't stop him from seeing it as competition. Game had been scarce that winter, and Rusty, young and strong then, always seemed to get there first. It was a game of sorts, one never acknowledged, but always played. Until the day the game stopped. It was deep in winter. Snow blanketed the ground in silence, and the forest felt suspended in time. That morning, Hank followed a trail and found it. Rusty, caught in a poacher's steel trap. Blood on the snow. The wildcat was injured but still fought, teeth bared, growling low, as if daring Hank to end it all right there. But Hank didn't. He knelt slowly, speaking in a low voice, almost a whisper. No words, just a rhythm. He reached out, careful, until Rusty no longer fought. With steady hands, Hank pried open the trap and gently bandaged the leg with torn pieces of his flannel shirt. It wasn't mercy, it wasn't redemption. It was something more primal, a recognition. Since that day, Rusty had never truly left. He never came close, never allowed a hand to touch him, but he was always there, watching from the shadows, appearing during the dusks and dawns, waiting for Hank to place a piece of jerky or meat on the porch before disappearing back into the trees. They had learned to exist beside one another, but today was different. Today, Rusty didn't wait. Today, he led. As they moved deeper into the forest, the weight of the past lingered on Hank's shoulders. The land he was leaving behind wasn't just a place, it was a memory. Every trail he walked had a story. Every tree bore witness to the life he had built and to the loss he had endured. Betty's laughter once echoed off these hills. Now, only wind answered back. Night began to settle in like a slow-falling curtain. The sky above faded from deep, blue to charcoal, stars just beginning to peek through. Hank's breath came in short bursts, the cold night air sharper than he remembered. His knees ached, his heart beat heavy. But he didn't stop. Rusty pressed on, and so did he. By midnight, they reached a small clearing, sheltered by rocks and thick fir branches. Rusty paused, glanced back once, then curled beneath a fallen log. Hank, grateful beyond words, slid off his backpack and sat on a patch of dry moss. From inside the bag, he pulled out his last canteen of water and the second-to-last piece of jerky. He placed half near Rusty. The old wildcat didn't move at first, but then slowly he rose, limped slightly, and began to eat, not hiding, not waiting, just eating. Under the starlit canopy, the two of them sat, silent, weary, but strangely content. Hank looked at Rusty and saw more than an animal. He saw a fellow survivor, a creature who had lost much but kept moving forward, a mirror perhaps to his own soul. The forest had taken many things from Hank, his youth, his wife, his health, but it had also given. In Rusty, it had given something rare, companionship without expectation, presence without pressure. And now it had given direction. Hank didn't know where Rusty was leading him. He didn't know if there would be shelter or safety or even food. But he knew one thing. It was better to walk into the unknown with a creature who had once been an enemy than to stay behind and be crushed by machines that knew nothing of love or memory. As he lay down beneath the stars, backpack as a pillow and jacket pulled tight, Hank whispered into the night. Not words, but breath. Gratitude, maybe, or farewell. Rusty, eyes half closed, remained just a few feet away. Still, distant, still wild, but there, and for Hank, that was enough. Rain came suddenly. Not a gentle drizzle or a passing cloudburst, but a deluge. The kind that transformed forest trails into rushing streams, that drowned birdsong and washed away footprints within seconds. On the third day of their journey, the skies above Blackwood cracked open and poured with a fury that felt almost personal, as if the land itself were grieving Hank's departure. Hank pulled his jacket tighter, every seam soaked through. His boots squelched in the mud with each step. The cold crept in beneath his clothes, burrowed deep into his bones. Still, he pressed on. Rusty moved ahead, slower than before. The rain had matted his fur, and a faint limp troubled his hind legs. No, doubt from the thorns and uneven ground they had crossed. But he didn't stop. He didn't complain. Just as he had always done, he led. Through thickets no human would dare enter, across rocky streams swollen with rain. It was near dusk when they stumbled upon it, a shallow rock alcove beneath a moss-covered outcrop, barely large enough for two bodies but dry, safe, shelter. Hank collapsed onto the stone floor, his back aching, his breath ragged. He leaned against the rock wall, removed his pack with trembling hands, and took inventory. 2 more strips of jerky, a nearly empty water flask, 1 heart pill, only 1. He stared at the small orange pillbox in his hand for a long moment. His fingers hesitated, then twisted off the cap. Inside lay a single white tablet, a single chance. He hadn't meant to leave in such haste, but when the engines had rumbled early, when the machines came crawling through the woods like steel beasts, he'd fled with what he could carry. The medication, the one thing he couldn't afford to forget, had been left behind on the cabin's shelf, right next to the teapot. Hank placed the pill on his tongue and swallowed dry. Bitterness spread across his mouth, sharp and acidic. It tasted like regret. Across from him, Rusty licked at a cut on his paw, small but deep. The cat's movements were slower now, his body less sure. He didn't hide it. He didn't pretend to be strong. There was something heartbreakingly honest about that. From his pack, Hank pulled out the last piece of jerky and broke it in half. 1 half for himself, 1 half for Rusty. He slid the food slowly across the stone floor. Normally, Rusty would wait for Hank to turn his back, to retreat, to respect the invisible line between human and wild. But this time, he didn't. He limped forward and without hesitation ate right there in front of him. Not a bond, not quite friendship, but trust. Outside, the rain continued to hammer the earth, beating a rhythm of endurance, of survival. The forest groaned under the weight of water. The world shrank to that small space beneath the stone, where 2 weary creatures shared warmth and silence. Night came fast. The temperature dropped. Hank curled onto his side, arms wrapped around himself. Pain fluttered beneath his ribs. Nothing sharp, not yet, but a persistent ache. He closed his eyes, listening to the rain and the occasional rustle of Rusty shifting beside him. When he awoke, it was still dark, but the rain had stopped. A soft mist hovered just above the forest floor. The world looked reborn, washed clean, glistening in silver hues. Hank stirred slowly, his muscles stiff. Nearby, Rusty lay curled beneath a low branch, his breathing steady, ears flicking at invisible sounds. Hank exhaled. The journey was not over, but they had made it through the storm, for now. They continued on, day after day, moving deeper into territory Hank didn't recognize. The trees grew thicker, the undergrowth wilder. Paths vanished, replaced by instinct. Hank followed Rusty now not just out of need, but because he had surrendered. The forest belonged to Rusty, and Rusty had chosen to share it. But the toll was real. Each mile felt heavier. Hank's breath came harder. His vision sometimes blurred after long climbs. Twice he stumbled on uneven ground, catching himself against tree trunks, pretending it was nothing. But Rusty noticed. He always noticed. Once, after a particularly long pause, the wildcat vanished into the brush. Hank waited, worried. Minutes passed. Then Rusty returned, dragging behind him a limp squirrel. He dropped it near Hank's feet and stepped back, watching. Hank laughed. A low, surprised laugh that cracked the tension in his chest. He hadn't laughed in months. They shared the squirrel that night. Roasted over a small fire Hank managed to coax from damp wood. The smell, the taste, it wasn't about hunger, it was about survival shared. One evening, as twilight faded into star-speckled night, Hank sat beside a small stream. He cupped his hands into the cold water, bringing it to his lips. Rusty lay a few feet away, eyes half closed. The forest hummed, with insects and frogs. Hank whispered, "Where are you taking me, old boy?" Rusty didn't answer. He never did. But somehow Hank felt the answer anyway. They were not running, not anymore. They were migrating, searching for something neither fully understood, but both needed: refuge. Not just from men with machines, but from the creeping loneliness that had begun to rot the edges of their souls. In each other, they had found motion again, direction, hope, and though the road ahead remained shrouded in mist and silence, they kept walking, side by side, into the dark. By the seventh day, the forest came to an end. One moment, the trees stretched endlessly around them, a green cathedral of moss and memory. The next, it opened up, abruptly, like a wound. The trees gave way to fields, wide and golden, and beyond them, rooftops. The small town of Millfield, unfamiliar and humming with human life, lay sprawled beneath the soft curve of distant hills. A paved road cut through the fields like a scar, black and unnatural. Hank stood at the edge of the forest, his feet planted in leaf mold, eyes squinting against the sudden light. He hadn't seen asphalt in over 3 decades. The sight made him dizzy. Beside him, Rusty froze. The wildcat's muscles tensed beneath, his ragged coat. His ears twitched, his tail flicked with nervous agitation. The openness terrified him. There were no shadows to hide in here, no scent of pine or safe cover. The world beyond the tree line was too exposed, too loud. This, Hank realized, might be the end of their path together. He knelt slowly and placed the last of the food, some dried meat, on the ground between them, a gift, a farewell. Rusty approached cautiously, sniffed the offering, then looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Hank saw something flicker there. Uncertainty, perhaps, or even sorrow. But then the wildcat turned away and disappeared, into the undergrowth. Hank turned toward Millfield. Every step away from the forest felt like a betrayal. The sounds of human life grew louder, car engines, voices, a dog barking in the distance. Hank's boots, caked in forest soil, left faint prints on the edge of the paved road. He felt like a ghost walking through someone else's world. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, the sun had begun to set. He found a pawn shop on the edge of Main Street and traded his old hunting knife and a few worn trinkets for cash, just enough for a meal and maybe one night of shelter. His back ached. His legs trembled. Drawn by the smell of coffee and the promise of warmth, he stepped into a small corner cafe named Ruby's. The woman behind the counter looked up from a battered newspaper. Her silver hair was pinned into a neat bun, her face lined and sharp-eyed. She scanned Hank from head to toe, the worn flannel, the mud-caked boots, the eyes that had seen too much. "Forest man," she muttered. Hank said nothing. He only nodded and sat down at the counter. She placed a steaming mug of black coffee in front of him without asking. Her name was Martha, and though her tone was gruff, her presence was kind. When Hank finally spoke, he told her about Blackwood, about Horizon Timber, about the machines that had come early and the eviction notice that had come too late. Martha didn't flinch. She just sighed. "Whole counties being swallowed up," she said. "One forest at a time." She poured him another cup. "You're not the first." Later, she introduced him to someone else, Susan Peterson, a retired ecologist who lived on the edge of town. Susan had once lived in a cabin at the fringe of Blackwood too, until she was forced out just a month before. Her eyes lit up when Martha told her about Hank. That night, Hank found himself seated in Susan's living room. Maps hung on the walls, detailed, hand-drawn maps with green patches and scribbled notes. The fireplace crackled softly. Outside, the wind moaned. Susan listened carefully as Hank told her everything, even about Rusty, He spoke of their strange connection, their journey through the forest, the shelter from the storm, and the moment of parting. He wasn't sure why. He shared so much. Maybe it was her eyes, calm, understanding, no trace of disbelief. Or maybe it was because he needed someone to understand. Susan did. She nodded as he spoke, as if she had heard this kind of story before. The wild has its own language, she said softly. Sometimes, two lost creatures speak it fluently. Then she pointed to a section of the map, Eagle Mountain Reserve, a protected area about 40 miles northeast, mostly untouched. She'd heard it was still pristine, home to old-growth forest and wildcats, perhaps even Rusty's kin. It was a glimmer of hope. That night, Hank couldn't sleep. He stared out the guest room window, past Susan's garden, into the darkness that once led to Blackwood. The pain in his chest pulsed with each heartbeat, a reminder that time was no longer an ally. The next morning, Susan took him to the local clinic. Dr. Chuck Wilson, a kind-eyed man in his 40s, checked his heart, listened to his chest, and handed him a prescription. "You'll need rest, medication. At your age, stress is dangerous," he warned. But Hank couldn't rest. Not in Millfield. The noise, the walls, the people, it all felt too foreign, too sharp. His body was healing, but his spirit was restless. That afternoon, returning to Susan's house, something changed. Susan was in the garden, standing very still. She pointed toward the edge of the trees. Hank followed her gaze. There, half hidden in the bushes, stood Rusty, wet from morning dew. His golden eyes watched with quiet intensity how he had crossed the fields, skirted the roads, evaded detection. It was a mystery, but he was here. Hank's heart clenched. He took a slow step forward. Rusty didn't flee. Susan whispered, "This doesn't happen." Wildcats didn't follow humans. They didn't leave their territories. But somehow, Rusty had done both. Maybe he was searching for something too. Maybe, Hank thought, they were each the other's only home now. On the third morning after Rusty's unexpected return, Hank set out again. Susan had prepared him with detailed maps, a week's worth of food, and a fresh supply of heart medication. She stood at the edge of her garden, watching as the two companions, one, man nearing 70, the other a scarred old wildcat, disappeared into the early mist, heading northeast. The road to Eagle Mountain was long, and it tested them both. Each day brought new challenges: dense brush, fallen logs, swollen creeks. Hank's body, worn from years of solitude and strain, grew heavier with every step. His breath came in wheezing gasps during climbs, and often he had to pause, leaning on tree trunks to steady himself. He tried to hide the weakness, but Rusty knew. He always did. Sometimes the wildcat would disappear for an hour or two, only to return with a freshly caught rabbit or squirrel. Hank never saw the hunt, only the quiet offering placed nearby, as if Rusty understood what it meant to provide when another could not. By the 12th day, the landscape changed. The thinning forest gave way to towering pines and deep ravines. In the distance, Eagle Mountain rose like a green cathedral, its slopes blanketed in ancient trees. The air felt different here, cooler, wilder, untouched. It looked like hope. At the edge of the reserve, a weathered wooden sign greeted them: Eagle Mountain Wildlife Preserve. No entry without permit. Beyond it, a narrow trail wound into the trees. A small ranger station stood nearby, nestled among the foliage. A man stepped out as Hank approached. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a red beard and eyes squinting beneath the brim of his hat. His nameplate read, Ray Dixon. Ray looked Hank over, a grizzled man with wild eyes, a patched backpack, and a silent, defiant presence. "You lost?" he asked. Hank shook his head. "Looking for a place?" Ray crossed his arms. "You can camp. 3 nights, max. But no one's allowed to live here. This is a protected reserve. Hank's heart sank. He had come so far, trusted so much. To be stopped by a regulation felt like a cruel joke. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, a second voice called from inside the station. A woman emerged, mid-40s, auburn hair pulled back, skin bronzed by sun. Her nameplate read Linda Parker, Reserve Director. She studied Hank, then asked gently, "Where are you from?" "Blackwood," Hank said. That word changed everything. Linda listened as he told her the whole story, about the eviction, about the journey, and finally about Rusty. He didn't mention the wildcat was nearby, watching from the trees, but somehow she knew. "You lived in the forest for 30 years?" she asked. Hank nodded. "And you didn't hunt, or log, or harm the land?" "I learned to live with it," he replied simply. She was quiet for a long time. Then, "We're understaffed. We need people who understand the forest, not from books, but from life. If you're willing, I can offer you something. A cabin, a job, a place." He could stay as a part-time ranger, helping patrol trails, monitor wildlife, report signs of poachers. Not heavy work, not city work, forest work. Hank didn't hesitate. Linda led him down a winding trail for nearly a mile to a small wooden cabin by a stream. It had once been a ranger's outpost, but had fallen into disuse. It was simple. 1 bedroom, a living space, a wood stove, and a wide porch overlooking the trees. No electricity, but clean water, silence, and sky. It felt like home. As Linda left to fetch supplies, Hank stepped onto the porch and whistled. The same note he'd used back at Blackwood. A signal. At first, nothing happened. Then, from the shadows, golden eyes blinked back. Rusty appeared. He stepped cautiously into the clearing, sniffed the air, surveyed the cabin. Hank placed food on the porch, then went inside. Through the window, he watched the wildcat approach and eat. Slow, deliberate, unafraid. The days passed gently. Hank began his work, hiking the trails, noting signs of deer, bear, foxes. He learned the rhythms of the new forest. His health improved. The quiet soothed him. His mind felt clearer than it had in years. Rusty changed too. At first, he came only at night, eating and vanishing. But soon he appeared during the day, lying on the porch while Hank drank tea, watching from a distance. As Hank scribbled notes into a leather-bound book, they shared space. Then they shared time. One morning, as Hank grabbed his walking stick and set out for his daily patrol, he saw Rusty waiting at the trailhead. He paused. Rusty looked back and then led the way. It became their routine. They walked the forest together, man and wildcat. Rusty always slightly ahead, occasionally vanishing, always returning. Hank didn't speak. He didn't need to. Their silence was enough. Linda watched them from afar, shaking her head in wonder. "You two," she said once, "are the strangest ranger team I've ever seen." Summer melted into autumn. The leaves turned amber and red, carpeting the ground in color. The air grew crisp. Rusty's coat thickened, his limp faded. Hank's steps became lighter, but peace is never permanent. One evening, Linda arrived, her face grim. A tourism company had proposed building an eco-resort just outside the reserve boundary, less than 2 miles from Hank's cabin. It would bring roads, construction, noise. Worse, it would cut off migration paths, especially for wildcats. They needed evidence, data, proof that this area was vital for the species. Linda turned to Hank. "You have him," she said. "You know his patterns, his life." Hank didn't hesitate. He spent every day documenting Rusty, his trails, hunting spots, resting places. He tracked other wildcats too, smaller, younger, more elusive. He noted everything: prints, scat, sounds, sightings. His field notes grew thick. He wasn't just protecting a reserve, he was protecting a home, not just for Rusty, but for every creature still clinging to the last wild places. And for himself. Winter came without mercy. Snow fell thick and fast, blanketing Eagle Mountain in white silence. One morning, Hank awoke with a tight pain in his chest. He stumbled outside, hoping the crisp air might help. But the ache deepened, a weight crushing. Down like a mountain, he collapsed onto the porch, gasping. His heart medication, just feet away, hanging in the coat inside, might as well have been miles. Then, a presence. Warmth. Breath. Rusty stood over him, golden eyes wide, uncertain, but unafraid. The wildcat took a step forward, then another, until his nose nearly touched Hank's hand. Then, something new, a cry. Not a growl, not a roar. A cry that echoed through the trees, sharp and desperate. That cry, coupled with the faint sound of Hank's emergency whistle, reached a team of rangers camping nearby. They found him moments later, collapsed on the porch, Rusty standing vigil. The image stunned them. An old man clinging to breath, a wildcat by his side. They rushed Hank to the nearest hospital. It wasn't a major heart attack, but serious enough to keep him there for 2 long weeks. Every day he asked about Rusty. Every day, Linda assured him, "We're leaving food, but no one's seen him." When Hank finally returned, wrapped in scarves, weak but standing, the cabin looked untouched, but empty. No prints in the snow, no golden eyes. He placed food on the porch anyway, then sat by the window and waited. 1 day. 2. On the 3rd night, in the silver light of the moon, a shape emerged. Rusty. He approached quietly, like old times, and began to eat. But this time, when Hank opened the door, the wildcat didn't flee. They looked at each other across the snow-covered porch. Something unspoken passed between them. Hank knelt, slowly extended a hand, and for the first time, Rusty stepped forward and touched him. It was not dramatic. It was simple. It was everything. Spring followed, flowers bloomed, grass returned, and with it, news. Linda arrived one morning with a wide smile and tears in her eyes. "The resort project is dead," she said. The data Hank had collected, the story of Rusty, the photo the rangers had taken of them that snowy morning. It had gone viral. Conservationists rallied. The public was moved. Eagle Mountain would remain untouched, safe. Their home. Today, on certain quiet days, lucky visitors to the reserve might catch a glimpse of something extraordinary. An old man with silver hair walking slowly through the woods. Beside him, not a dog, not another person, but a wildcat, grey and scarred, eyes glowing like dusk. They never touched, but they moved together. 2 aging creatures who had been broken, then rebuilt. Not by force, but by trust. And though their story had found a kind of peace, the forest never stopped changing. There would be new challenges, new migrations, new seasons, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of another chapter.